Hi again, and welcome to The Way I Do It. If you haven't been here before, my name is Chris. I'm located in Jamestown, New York. A few weeks ago, I bought this Dixie Chopper. It's a Silver Eagle 2760 HP. It's a nice machine. It's a commercial machine, but it's 10 years old. I bought it in lieu of buying a brand new John Deere. That's another video. But when I bought this, it had a hard starting issue. So come along with me and I'll show you how I changed the fuel filter, the fuel pump, and cleaned out the carburetor. It's got a Generac engine. There's not a lot of information online. So come along and enjoy. It was a little bit windy when I did this, so I thought I'd narrate it after I edit. So the first thing I got into is removing the old fuel filter. Of course, I'm outside in the bright sunlight, so you can't really see what I'm doing. But this had the original fuel pump, 10 years old, pinch clamps on it. And I don't fault the original fuel pump because I have an old Cub Cadet in the same situation. But something here just isn't getting the fuel to the carburetor on starter. The thing was running okay, but it just seemed like it was leaking back to the tanks. When you do this, you probably should have low fuel in the fuel tanks, but sometimes when you change a fuel pump, you don't get to choose. So another thing that you want to do is get new fuel lines. I only got the fuel pump and fuel filters. I should replace the fuel lines, being that they were 10 years old. The place I bought it was actually a John Deere dealer. This was a vehicle they'd taken in on trade. Unfortunately, as with many commercial dealers, they don't warehouse the trade-in units. What they typically do is just park them outside. They're in a rural area, so they don't have to have a lot of concern for vandalism and theft. But the sun does that for them. So with COVID and everything else going on, this was taken in trade probably around, I would say, this is September, probably around June. So it just missed their auction, which they I believe they normally send things to auction in May. And so it sat on their lot for 400 days. For the price they wanted for it, buying a new John Deere made sense to a lot of people. I'll go into why I bought it in another video. But sitting it outside in the sun and rain and snow, this unit only had 150 hours on it, so it was basically new. The person probably only had a small lawn, and they mowed once a week for a few years. So yeah, I'm just trying to get that fuel line off. Trying to figure out where to place it, where it does see it keeps leaking, because fortunately I just filled up with fuel. And there is no fuel shutoff on this either. It has two fuel tanks, one on left and one on right, and they just have a Y that goes together. Now I did read where that Y is to equalize the fuel, so if you're on a slope, blah blah blah. No, they just didn't want to put a fuel valve in it, because people would probably run out of fuel in one tank and then forget to switch it, and they'd go fuel up and they complain it only holds 3 or 4 gallons of fuel. Not sure what this holds between the two tanks, but it's suitable for mowing. It's not like the really super large ones of today. I'm thinking it's maybe 6 gallons between the two. So yeah, here's a look at the new fuel pump. It's $12 on Amazon. Came with 2 fuel filters. Nice thing is they put these little caps on, so there's no way you get any debris inside it. That bottom one is the supply. That's the vacuum. And this is the line that goes to the tank. So you make sure you pull those caps off, because you don't want that blockage when you go to start it. Because you actually could slide the hose right over those caps. They're black and they're not real obvious. We'll go ahead and get this set into place, and then we'll move on to pulling the carburetor off and getting that disassembled. believe these were 10mm, which is a little transition from my Cub Cadet, who I don't know what they do today, but for the longest time Cub Cadet stayed with SAE, so that old timers could work on them. That way MTD is a Cleveland-based company, and it's their way of keeping things American instead of going to metric, which we know most automobiles went to in the 70s. So the first thing on this Dixie Chopper to do with this Generac engine is pull the air filter off it. And that's a nice thing about this, is it had this commercial air filter. So it's just held on with a bracket right here with 2 screws, and then the intake plenum. So I didn't even have to loosen the hose from the filter. I just pulled this bracket off, and then it's bolted to the intake plenum. Get my big old fat hands in there and unscrew it. Again, I think these were 10mm bolts. Then to save time, I skipped over breaking apart the air filter and the intake plenum, and I just am removing the intake plenum. So there's just 2 nuts on this side, 2 nuts on the other side, and you'll see as we go, I guess the Briggs engine actually uses studs as bolts to hold the carburetor on. So you have the stud that holds the air cleaner on, and you have to remove it. But that's not the case with this Generac. Yep, now we move over to the left-hand side. You can see everything's pretty easy to get to. I mean, there's no shrouding, there's no air cleaner, there's no plastic cover. And even as a homeowner, if you have one of these, you can actually access it and just keep it clean, spray a little lube, use some PV Blaster dry lube so it doesn't pick up dirt and debris. Use some white lithium if you like, and just wash it off with something every few months, once a year. Okay, so I've got the nuts off now. The next thing is to remove this this vacuum line. This is just on the intake plenum, intake side of the carburetor. There. Now we're free, so we can get the intake plenum and the air filter out of the way. Just make sure the gasket doesn't get torn, because I don't like to replace gaskets just because. No reason for it. Just take care, and we can reuse it. Now we can remove the choke cable. There's a couple of clamps on it, which is really nice. You can make note of its position, but really, if you're doing a good job, when you reinstall it, you'll check the operation of the cable. So it's really not that important. You have to loosen these quite a bit to remove the cable. Now again, a product of this being outdoors for the last 400 days. A little corrosion, so I put some lube on there, and I just continue to loosen these to get this darn cable off. Okay, so quickly we remove the choke. There's 2 clamps holding it on. It takes quite a bit to get them off. I sprayed it with some lube. Then I went to the other side, snapped off the throttle actuator, and then it still didn't come off, so I had to remove the actual choke from the bell crank that operates it. It's a little snap-on, and luckily that was in good shape after being in the sun for 400 days. So then we can just pull the carburetor off. This is the OEM carburetor. Not sure what the company is that makes it, but it's the Generac piece. There's a little look. It's not really too dirty. Doesn't look too bad. That's a choke. Doesn't choke it off completely, so that's, I'm sure, an emissions thing because they don't want to draw in raw fuel. And so I lost a little bit of the footage. I removed the float bowl. It wasn't too dirty. I took the float off. Nothing looked too bad in there. This is actually what it looked like when I removed it. When you do remove it, the screws are tight, so you want to have the correct, whatever, number 2 screwdriver. It's a Phillips. Don't try using too small a one or too large a one. Make sure it fits really well and you have a good grip on it when you remove it. Then I just sprayed it down with a can of carburetor cleaner. Picked this up at an estate auction, so I had virtually $0 into it. But just regular Walmart carburetor cleaner will do. Here's the name of the carburetor. I don't know if that's D-E-N-I, D-E-N-I, D-E-K-I, D-E star I. I don't know what it is, but this is the Generac OEM carburetor. My 2012 model, that's what came on it, and this is what the emissions called for. So again, I'm spraying down all the little orifices. Being an emissions carburetor, there is no adjustment for idle, no adjustment for primary. And of course, they make it with all these plugs and inserts and so on. I did not remove the jets. I did not remove the throttle plates. In my experience, going back to Holley carburetors, you don't remove throttle plates. You may see some people repairing carburetors that want to take out the shaft and all this other stuff, but when you start getting that deep into it, there's no reason to take them out. You can just spray them down. Take compressed air. I've got like 125 pounds of pressure in my air compressor. So after I rinsed it out and broke down the chemicals that may have been deposited from the fuel, I then took the compressed air, and any place there was an orifice, you blow it out. Now in some carburetors, you got to be careful when you take them apart. They may have springs in them. They may have little what look like ball bearings. So you just have to be careful when you're doing that. Some may even have diaphragms in certain locations. So just be leery when you take it apart. This one had none of those, so I was able to just blow it out. So yeah, that looks pretty good. It's all blown out. Now we'll take the bowl, and I want to remove this O-ring seal before I spray any chemicals in here or do anything. I don't want to blow compressed air in there and lose it on the ground because I am outdoor in the sunlight. So we'll just go through everything and make sure there's no debris that came in. And again, at 10 years you should replace the fuel lines as well as a fuel filter and pump. Now we go ahead and put it back together. Put that O-ring back in there. There's a little tab to hang the float valve on the float. Just hold that upside down, set that in there, not losing anything. Then you put the pin in there. Now somebody might want to recheck the float level, but I would think it would be accurate from the factory. You can. There's not a lot of information for this carburetor, but if it just holds up and makes contact, it's probably adequate. Then try to remember the correct alignment of the bowl. It almost looks like it goes on either way, but we know which side of the carburetor the choke is on, and that's the same side that solenoid goes. And then this is all pretty simple. You certainly could put a little like silicone grease on the O-ring. Putting it on dry probably isn't too bad either. You certainly don't want to seal it with any sealer because it is an O-ring. So yeah, now let's get to our install. And like they say, installation is the reverse of removal. So you put the gasket back on there, make sure there's no debris that's fallen in there. I sprayed a little lube on the choke or on the throttle linkage. You can use dry lube, that's probably the best. I used a light spray on grease. Actually, it was a gun grease. Now we connect back up the choke. Then we'll go ahead and put the gasket back on for the intake plenum. Plug in the wires for the solenoid. You can actually check the function of that solenoid. Just put your hand on it and turn the ignition key on and you'll feel it click. If that doesn't click, you got a problem. And actually that may have been part of my problem. Maybe that was hanging up. Maybe the piston that it was operating was hanging up somehow, but I don't know. Okay, so we've got the carburetor mounted. We'll throw the intake plenum back in place. Put our 4 nuts on and the 2 bolts on the air cleaner bracket. Then we go to the other side, put them on. Say, did you hear the story about the old sea captain that came into the bar and he had this schooner's steering wheel down his pants, kind of sticking up out? The bartender looks at him and says, "Captain, what's the ship's steering wheel doing in your pants?" "Arr, matey, it drives me nuts." Ah, yeah, I forgot to laugh too. Okay, so now we finish connecting up the fuel pump. And again, because I broke the lines off, I'm in the sunlight, so my arm is making the camera readjust a little confusedly. I like those little spring clamps. They work adequately. You don't need stainless clamps that'll torque on. Now let's see how we did. Let's see if it'll even run. Check the oil. Yeah, it's awful low, but that's how it is. It does say full. Get up on this baby. Choke. Contact. So as the saying goes, the proof in the pudding is in the eating. So this has been parked overnight now, and the initial problem was a real hard start. among other things. So let's see. So I can't say for sure what the exact problem was on it. I replaced a fuel pump, a fuel filter, and I blew out the carburetor. Carburetor didn't look that bad, but we know small little bits of debris can cause a problem. And it's got that funny solenoid in the bottom that I'm not familiar with. It looks like it's made to shut the fuel off when you shut the vehicle down, probably for emissions. But what's important is it works now. So come back and watch some more of my videos. I'm going to be doing a walk around on this Dixie Chopper to show you why I bought a 10-year-old Dixie Chopper instead of buying a brand new commercial John Deere. Smash the like button, subscribe. You don't have to ring a bell. I'm trying to build that subscriber base. Appreciate you watching. That's the way I do it.